My name is Leo Vance, and on July 14th, 2024, I was 17 years old. It was a Sunday in Mesa, Arizona, the kind of day where the heat doesn't just sit on you, it actively tries to crush you. We were at the Grace Fellowship Picnic, an annual thing held in a park that was mostly dirt and parched grass. I remember the smell of lighter fluid and cheap hot dogs, and the sound of a portable speaker clipping because someone turned the worship music up too high. I felt off since the morning. Not a flu off, but a heavy, rhythmic thumping in my chest that made my vision swim every time I stood up. My mom kept telling me to drink more water, handing me those lukewarm plastic bottles that sweat in your hand. I remember looking at the church elders huddled under a canopy, laughing and debating about the new building fund, and feeling this strange, cold distance from them. Around 2:13 p.m., the air seemed to vanish. I wasn't even doing anything strenuous. I was just reaching for a bag of chips on a folding table. Suddenly, my heart didn't just thumping. It felt like it was trying to kick its way out of my ribs. It was a supraventricular tachycardia, though I didn't know the word then. My pulse hit 210, then it just blurred. The blue sky turned a bruised, metallic purple. I tried to call out to my friend, Caleb, who was standing right next to me, but my jaw felt like it was made of lead. I hit the ground hard. I remember the sensation of the dry, prickly grass against my cheek and the vibration of footsteps running toward me. Someone screamed. It was my mother, but her voice sounded like it was coming through a long, PVC pipe. Everything narrowed down to a single, pinhole view of a red soda can rolling slowly across the dirt. Then the pinhole closed. There was no tunnel, no life flashing. Just a sudden, violent silence that felt heavier than the Arizona sun. I was gone before the first person even reached down to check my pulse. The first thing I realized when I woke up was that I was looking at the top of a fluorescent light fixture. I wasn't in the park anymore. I was in the back of an ambulance, and then, in a blink, I was in Trauma Room 3 at Banner Desert Medical Center. I wasn't hovering near the ceiling like a ghost in a movie. I was just there, observing with a clinical, detached clarity that was terrifyingly calm. I saw myself. My skin was a shade of grayish blue that looked like wet clay. My shirt had been sheared off with trauma shears, the jagged fabric edges lying on the floor next to a discarded oxygen mask. I watched a nurse named Sarah. I saw her name tag, struggling to find a vein in my left arm, while another person slammed the crash cart into the side of the bed. The sound was brutal. The thump hiss of the ambu bag, the frantic rhythmic clicking of the monitor flatlining. Asystole, someone said. It wasn't a panicked shout. It was a professional, tired observation. They weren't fighting for a soul. They were fighting a broken machine. I watched the doctor, a guy with salt and pepper hair and a coffee stain on his lab coat, lean his entire body weight into my chest. I heard the distinct, wet crack of my sternum giving way. It didn't hurt me, but I felt the vibration of it in the air. I saw my father in the hallway through the glass door. He wasn't praying. He was just staring at his hands, turning his wedding ring over and over, his face completely blank. That's when the reality hit me. The world keeps moving when you stop. They injected epinephrine, then atropine. I watched the clock on the wall, 2:38 p.m. I had been dead for over 8 minutes. The room started to grow cold, not a physical cold, but a systemic withdrawal of warmth. The edges of the trauma room began to fray, the white walls peeling away to reveal something much deeper and much more silent. The hospital room didn't disappear. It just stopped being the most real thing in the room. I was standing in the corner now, near the sharps container, and I realized I wasn't alone. But it wasn't a being of light or a winged creature. It was a man. He was wearing a simple, dark garment that looked like it belonged to a laborer, not a king. He was leaning against the wall, watching the doctors work on my body with an expression of profound, quiet grief. He looked like he had been crying for a long time. When he turned to look at me, I didn't feel a rush of euphoria. I felt a crushing weight of accountability. He didn't say, "Welcome home." He looked at me, then looked back at the doctors who were now preparing the paddles for a third shock. "They are trying to restart a heart that forgot why it was beating," he said. His voice wasn't booming. It was low, like a secret whispered in a library. He stepped toward me, and the hospital room blurred. The floor beneath us turned into the floor of my own church back in Mesa. But it was different. The pews were full, but the people were transparent. I could see through their Sunday best to their insides, and they were hollow. They were going through the motions of a liturgy, singing songs about fire and spirit, but their hearts were like cold ash. Jesus. I knew it was him, though he looked so ordinary it hurt. Pointed to the pulpit. The pastor was speaking, but no sound was coming out, just a gray mist that settled over the congregation like dust. The doors are locked from the inside, he said. He looked me directly in the eyes, and for the first time, I felt a spark of true, visceral fear. Leo, I am sending you back because the warning must be given. The church is not prepared for what is already at the door. They have built a fortress out of cardboard, and the storm is here. The vision of the church didn't fade, it intensified. Jesus led me down the center aisle of Grace Fellowship, the very place I'd spent every Sunday since I was in diapers. But now, the air felt thick, like walking through water. He stopped at the third row where the Millers sat, a family that donated the most to the youth missions every year. I saw Mr. Miller singing, his eyes closed, his hands raised high. But as I looked closer, his chest wasn't hollow anymore. It was filled with flickering black static, like a television tuned to a dead channel. Jesus reached out his hand, not to touch him, but to point at the floor beneath Mr. Miller's feet. The carpet was rotting. A dark, oily liquid was seeping from the floorboards, soaking into the hemlines of the congregants' clothes. They think the enemy is outside, Jesus said, his voice vibrating in my marrow. They point at the screens, they point at the laws, they point at the streets. But the rod is under the pulpit. He turned to face the stage where the worship band was lost in a crescendo. I saw the lead singer, a guy I'd always looked up to, but his face was a mask of dry porcelain, cracking at the edges. Behind him, the spirit they were inviting wasn't a light. It was a heavy, suffocating fog of ego. It was a performance for an audience of themselves. Jesus looked at me, and the grief in his eyes turned into a terrifyingly sharp clarity. The church has built a kingdom of middle management. They have replaced my blood with branding. They are prepared for a gala, Leo. They are prepared for a growth seminar. But they are not prepared for the shaking. He grabbed my forearm, and the grip was solid, realer than the hospital bed I was dying on. When the pillars fall, they will have nothing to hold on to because they've spent 40 years leaning on shadows. You will tell them, the fire is not coming to warm the house. It is coming to see what is made of stone and what is made of straw. The scene shifted instantly. I wasn't in the church anymore. I was in my own kitchen back home, 3 months into the future. It was night. The only light came from the blue glow of the microwave clock, 11:14 p.m. I saw myself. Not the spirit me, but the me who had survived. I looked thin, haunted. My mother was sitting across from me at the small wooden table where we did our taxes and ate cereal. She was crying, but it wasn't the loud, wailing grief of the hospital. It was a quiet, cold, exhausted weeping. On the table between us was a stack of legal documents and a letter from the church board. I leaned in to read it. It was a formal notification that our family was being distanced from the leadership circle. Because I had come back talking about the rot and the warning, the very people who had prayed for my resurrection had turned me into a pariah. They called it spiritual instability. They told my mom that my experience was a neurological glitch caused by the hypoxia, the lack of oxygen to my brain. I can't do this anymore, Leo, the future mom said, her voice cracking. The Millers won't speak to me. The pastor says you're confusing the youth. We've lost everything. Our community, our support. I'm losing my job at the Christian Academy because of what you're saying. I watched my future self reach out to her, but she pulled her hand away. It was a physical rejection. The warning wasn't just a message for a crowd. It was a wrecking ball for my own life. I realized then that telling the truth wouldn't make me a hero. It would make me an outcast in the only world I had ever known. Jesus stood beside me in that dark kitchen, his shadow long and heavy on the linoleum. This is the cost, he whispered. Are you still willing to speak when the house you're warning is the one that throws you out? The kitchen dissolved into a void of pure, pressurized gray. Jesus moved directly into my personal space, his face inches from mine. This wasn't the gentle shepherd from the Sunday school paintings. This was the king of check and balance. The title of the message you carry is "The Church is Not Prepared," he said, and as he spoke, the words appeared in the air like brands of fire. Now understand why. He waved his hand, and I saw a sequence of rapid-fire events inside churches across the country. It wasn't a world-ending asteroid or a nuclear blast. It was a systemic collapse of integrity. I saw a famous pastor behind a closed door, staring at a bank screen that showed millions of dollars being diverted into private accounts. I saw a committee in a basement voting to silence a victim to protect their reputation. I saw a prayer meeting where people were checking their stock portfolios on their laps while they whispered, "Amen." This is why they are not prepared, Jesus declared. They have aligned their hearts with the stability of the world systems. When the world's economy shudders, their faith will shatter because it is tied to the same ledger. When the world's morality shifts, they will have no anchor because they have traded the truth for relevance. They are prepared for a world that loves them or a world that ignores them. They are not prepared for a world that demands they choose between their comfort and my name. He leaned closer, his eyes like burning coals. The outcome is determined by one thing: the appetite. Those who hunger for the institution will starve with it. Those who hunger for me will be the only ones standing. Tell them, the separation is not coming from the world. I am the one doing the separating. The pressurized gray void began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that I felt in my teeth. Jesus didn't move, but the space around him seemed to tighten. "You see the cost, Leo," he said, and his voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command. "You see the table in your kitchen. You see your mother's face. You see the empty seats where your friends used to sit." He wasn't comforting me. He was showing me the blueprint of my own isolation. He was giving me a choice that felt more like a sacrifice. I looked at him, and for a second, I hated the mission. I wanted to go back to being the 17-year-old kid who just cared about the church picnic and passing his driver's test. I wanted the white light and the pearly gates everyone talks about, not this heavy, jagged truth. "I can't do that to her," I said, my voice sounding thin and small in the vastness. "I can't destroy my mom's life." Jesus didn't blink. He reached out and touched my chest, right over where the doctors were currently slamming the defibrillator paddles. "If you stay silent to save the house, you will burn with the house," he said. The image of Grace Fellowship returned, but this time it was different. I saw the roof beginning to sag under the weight of an invisible, dark snow. The people inside were still singing, still clapping, but the walls were thinning into paper. I realized then that the warning wasn't a threat, it was a final mercy. If I didn't speak, they would be crushed without ever knowing the ceiling was falling. The choice wasn't between my comfort and their anger. It was between their temporary comfort and their ultimate survival. "I'll do it," I whispered. The moment the words left my mouth, the hum stopped. The gray void shattered like glass. The last thing I saw was his face, not smiling, but nodding once, a grim, soldier-to-soldier acknowledgement of a burden accepted. "The evidence will begin with a signature," he said. "Look for the ink." Suddenly, I wasn't standing. I was falling. It was a physical, sickening drop, like the floor of an elevator snapping. The silence of the void was replaced by a cacophony of violence. Thump! My entire body bucked upward. The smell of singed hair and ozone hit me like a physical blow. I was back in trauma room 3, and the pain was absolute. My chest felt like it had been crushed by a semi-truck. Every rib screamed. I tried to gasp, but my lungs felt full of broken glass. "We have a rhythm," someone shouted. It was Sarah, the nurse. Her face was drenched in sweat, her mask hanging off one ear. I opened my eyes, but the light was blinding. I tried to move my hand, but I was strapped down. The clinical reality of the hospital rushed back in. The cold air, the beep of the monitors, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I saw the doctor drop the paddles onto the cart with a heavy clack. He looked at the clock. 2:46 p.m. "Welcome back, kid." He didn't look miraculous. He looked exhausted. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of my blood on his brow. I tried to speak, to tell them about the kitchen, about the rot under the pulpit, about the gray mist. But all that came out was a wet, rattling cough. They were shoving a tube down my throat, and the world began to blur again, this time into the haze of heavy sedation. As they wheeled me out of the trauma room, I saw my father through the glass again. He was still standing there, still turning that ring. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't joy. It was a deep, unsettling dread, as if he knew that the son they just brought back wasn't the same one who had collapsed at the picnic. 3 days later, I was moved out of the ICU. My chest was a road map of purple and yellow bruises, and breathing felt like a deliberate, manual chore. My mom was there, sitting in the plastic chair by the window, clutching her Bible. The room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic hum of the Ford pump. The door opened, and Pastor Greg walked in. He was wearing his hospital visit face, a practiced expression of somber concern and practiced hope. He stayed by the door, not coming too close to the bed. "It's a miracle, Leo," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "The whole congregation has been fasting. We're going to have you up on stage as soon as you're strong enough. Your testimony is going to bring in so many new families." I looked at him, and suddenly, the hospital room faded. I saw the gray mist from the vision leaking out of his mouth as he spoke. I saw the porcelain mask of his face. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was the moment. "The church is not prepared, Pastor," I said. My voice was raspy, barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. The smile on his face didn't drop. It flickered, like a light bulb about to burn out. My mom looked up, her brow furrowing. "Leo, honey, you're tired," she said. But I didn't stop. "The rod is under the pulpit, Greg. You're building a fortress of cardboard." The silence that followed was suffocating. Pastor Greg's posture shifted. His shoulders went back, and the warmth vanished from his eyes. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't ask what I saw. He just looked at my mother and said, "The trauma was very severe. We should talk to the doctors about his cognitive recovery." He left the room without another word, but as he closed the door, I saw him check his phone, his thumb hovering over a banking app. The ink was already dry. Discharge didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a deportation. When I finally walked out of Banner Desert, the Arizona air felt thin and artificial. My mother drove in a silence so heavy I could hear the hum of the car's tires on the asphalt. She didn't ask about the rot or the warning again. Every time I tried to bring up the vision of the kitchen, the one that was supposed to happen in 3 months, she would turn up the radio or start talking about my physical therapy schedule. It was as if she were trying to drown out a sound only I could hear. The following Sunday, I wasn't allowed on stage. The miracle testimony had been quietly scrubbed from the bulletin. Instead, I sat in the back row, my chest still bound in medical tape, watching Pastor Greg. He was preaching about the season of expansion, pacing the stage with a wireless mic. But as he spoke, I saw it again. The black static in the chest of the elders, the gray mist settling over the teenagers in the front row. I realized they weren't just unprepared. They were actively insulating themselves against the truth. They had built a version of God that was essentially a high-end concierge, someone to fix their credit scores and bless their summer vacations. After the service, I tried to talk to Caleb. We had been best friends since kindergarten. I caught him near the sound booth. "Caleb, man, I need to tell you what I saw. It's not what we thought. The whole system is." He cut me off, looking around nervously as if I were carrying a contagious disease. "Leo, hey, glad you're better, truly. But maybe take it easy on the visions talk. My dad's on the board, and they're worried about you. They think the lack of oxygen did something." He didn't look me in the eye. He looked at my shoes. The social fracture wasn't a sudden break. It was a slow, cold withdrawal. I was being erased in real time. The date was October 14th, 2024, exactly 3 months to the day since I died in the park. I was sitting in the kitchen, just like the vision had shown. The blue light of the microwave read 11:14 p.m. The air in the house was freezing, not because of the AC, but because the atmosphere had become brittle. My mother sat across from me, the wooden table cluttered with the exact same stack of legal documents I had seen in the void. "They did it," she whispered. Her voice was flat, the sound of someone who had run out of tears. She pushed a letter toward me. It wasn't just a distancing letter anymore. It was a formal notification from the Grace Fellowship Holdings Group. Because the church owned the small Christian academy where she taught, and because they owned the townhouse we lived in through a clergy support trust, we were being evicted. Morality clauses. Spiritual disharmony. The terms were clinical, but the intent was lethal. They weren't just rejecting my message. They were dismantling our lives to protect the institution's image. Then, the proof happened. The one irreversible event Jesus had signaled. My mother reached for her phone to call my aunt, but her hand stopped midair. She looked at the wall, at the framed picture of our family standing in front of the church's new wing. Without a word, she stood up, took the picture down, and walked to the trash can. She dropped it in. The glass didn't shatter. It made a dull, final thud against the plastic liner. She looked at me, and her eyes were empty. "You were right," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. They aren't prepared. They're just landlords. In that moment, the church I had loved died more permanently than I ever had. The community was gone, replaced by a balance sheet. I'm 18 now. We live in a cramped apartment on the edge of Tempe, far away from the manicured lawns of Mesa. My mother works at a secular preschool now. She doesn't carry her Bible anymore. She doesn't talk about God at all. We sit in silence most evenings, the ghost of what we used to believe hovering between us like smoke. My chest still aches when the weather changes, a dull reminder of the ribs that had to break so I could breathe again. I don't go to Grace Fellowship. I don't go anywhere. Sometimes I sit on the balcony and watch the sunset turn the sky that bruised, metallic purple I saw before I collapsed. I think about the rot and the static. I see it everywhere now, not just in churches, but in the way people cling to their certainties while the floorboards beneath them are turning to liquid. The warning wasn't about an apocalypse in the sky. It was about the collapse of the internal structure. It was about how we've traded the living water for a plumbing system we can control. Yesterday, I got a text from Caleb. It was a link to a news story about Pastor Greg. Something about a financial restructuring and a quiet resignation. No apology, no explanation, just a generic statement about entering a new season of rest. I deleted it without replying. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I'm not a prophet. I'm just a kid who died and saw that the house was on fire while everyone inside was busy arguing about the color of the curtains. The sun went down, leaving the room in a deep, heavy shadow. I stayed there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own heart, thumping, steady, and terrifyingly alone.